What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Hope you are doing amazing today. In this video, we're going to be covering the difference between state and binding properties in SwiftUI. So let's go ahead and get started now. So to start things off, guys, we're going to go over some of the fundamentals behind how state and binding properties work within SwiftUI. And then we're going to hop into Xcode and do an example to apply the knowledge that we learn here to gain a better understanding of how this stuff works. So before we can understand binding properties, we need to first understand state properties. So let's take a look at this example we have here in front of us and read this description really quick. We see that SwiftUI views are a function of state. So when we modify a state property, the view reconfigures itself with that updated state. We don't modify our views directly, and this is the essence of declarative programming. The opposite of that being imperative programming, something like UIKit. If you guys have used that before, you see that we have to modify our views directly. The difference between SwiftUI, which is a declarative interface, is that we modify state properties, and in turn, our view updates or reconfigures itself with the updated state. So the view is completely state dependent. So if we look at this example here, we can see that our view v is a function of our state s. So this is my view and this is my state. When my state var is on is equal to false, my toggle is off. If I modify my toggle and then in turn modify the state property, my toggle switches to on and my state var is now true. So basically we have modified a state property and then our view reconfigures itself with the updated state. So let's actually hop into Xcode and see if we can produce an example of this to see it working in real time. So just go ahead and get Xcode opened up, guys, and really quickly let me show you what we're going to be doing before we get started. This is the settings app in the simulator. We're going to be implementing this sort of toggle here to modify the appearance of our applications from either light to dark mode or dark to light mode, just like that. So let's go ahead and get Xcode opened up and hit next here to create our app. I'm going to call this SwiftUI property wrappers. And then we're just going to hit next. And guys, in a future video, I'm going to be covering the difference between state object and observable object and environment object as well. So make sure you like and subscribe to the channel, like this video, smash that like button for me, and make sure you turn notifications on as well to get more content like this to help you guys improve your understanding of how SwiftUI works. So let's go ahead and just let me get this nice and big and let's see how we're going to create this toggle. So first off, I want us to create our state property that's going to control the toggle value, turning on or off. Okay, so let's just go ahead and say at state private var dark mode enabled, and that's going to equal false. And let's go ahead and just modify this VStack. So keep the VStack there, guys, and we're just going to create a toggle, and we're going to have this is on and label. So we'll cover why this has to be a binding here, but basically we just need to pass in this state property and say dark mode enabled and hit enter on that label, and we're going to create a simple view. So I could just say text dark mode, just like that. And turning this off and on will modify this state property. So now that we have that implemented, let's implement some logic to actually modify the background color of our view based on whether or not that toggle is set to true or false, or on or off, basically. So I'm going to wrap this VStack in a ZStack. So just hit Command, click on it, and say embed in ZStack. And then here, let's go ahead and give it a background color. So I'm just going to say color.black. So you guys can see this modifies my view to have a black background color. You can also go down to the bottom here and say .ignores safe area to make it take up the entire screen. And you can see here that I can still see my toggle, but my text you can't see because that is also currently black. So basically what we need to do, guys, is implement some simple logic here just to change the background color of the view, and then we're going to do the same thing for the text. So we can use a ternary statement to do that instead of an if-else statement. It's easier to write. We can just say dark mode enabled, yes, .black, no, .white. So you guys will see now that dark mode is off. And then if I turn it on, it changes the view's background color. So if we go back to our diagram, here's what we're doing essentially. We are toggling this state property, and toggling that modifies, this toggle, we're turning it on or off, and when we turn it on or off, it modifies the state property. The view then reconfigures itself to have that updated state. So basically what's happening is we change this to true when we toggle it on, and then the view says, hey, a state property changed. I know I need to now reconfigure myself to have the updated state, which in this case is the black background color because dark mode is enabled. So this is just saying if dark mode is enabled, make it black. If it's not, make it white. So if I turn it off, it goes back to a white background. So basically, guys, we just need to do the same thing for the text. We could say foreground color, dark mode enabled, yes is going to be white, no is dot black. So in this case, if we want to see the text when dark mode is enabled, we want it to be white. If not, we want it to be black. So that's as simple as it gets, right? That's how SwiftUI works in terms of being state dependent, right? Views are a function of state. Modifying state will in turn modify our view. So now that we understand how state properties work, let's move on to understanding how binding properties work and then do an example of that to really bring this all together. So first, I'm going to show you guys an example of how a binding property would work, and then we're going to cover some of the fundamentals and theory behind how binding properties work and how they're related to state properties, and then we are going to implement our own example. So let's go ahead and check out how a binding property would work in a real application. So to show you guys a quick example of how this stuff works, I have the reminders app opened on my simulator. I'm going to go ahead and create a new reminder, and let's pay attention to this list tag that we have here. Right now it says work. Let's imagine I can change that from work to personal. So imagine that that is tied to some sort of state property, right? And when I select a new one, it changes that state property and it updates my view with the new state, either work or personal, right? So the interesting thing here is I have to modify that property in a separate view. And then when I click the new tag, it goes back to my original view and modifies the tag there. So basically you have to use a binding property to do that. The core of this is that I want to modify the state of something in view A, but I am doing that action or performing that action from view B. So let's imagine this is view A and this is view B. When I click on something in view B, it modifies the state of my view A. So we have to use binding properties to do that, and we're going to take a look here to see exactly how that works. So this is a slightly different example, but the concept and the foundation is the same. Let's read this really quickly. A binding property wrapper creates a link to a state property. We cannot create binding properties without state properties. State property is the origin, and modifying the binding property will modify the original state property. So let's take a look at this example, guys. Imagine I have some state property that determines whether or not I'm going to present a new sheet or a view. Right? So if I hit this button, it will change this state property to true, and then it will present view B. But now let's imagine I want to dismiss view B. Well, the property that determines the presentation of view B exists in view A, right? So the only way I can dismiss or show view B is by modifying this state property in view A. So I create a binding variable that links the two things. So now this variable is linked to this variable, so that when I hit dismiss and this variable changes to false, because they are bound together or essentially linked to each other, when this variable changes, it will modify the original state property. And then ultimately it will dismiss that sheet because this changes back to false. So we hit dismiss, it changes show to false, this updates state, and then it dismisses the sheet. And then we see here that the state gives the binding variable a value. So a binding property cannot exist without a state property. It exists only to modify state properties, right? So it's always this sort of parent-child relationship that you're going to see. The binding property will exist in the child view, and the state property will exist in the parent view. And then when I want to modify my state property from my child view, I use a binding to link the two things together and ultimately update what's going on in the parent. So back in our example, this is view A or the parent view, and then I go to my child view or some detail view, and modify some binding property, and it in turn modifies the original state property and then reconfigures my view. So now we can see how state and binding properties are related. Let's go ahead and implement this example that we see here with simply showing or hiding a sheet, and we'll do another fun example as well to really cement you guys' understanding of this. So let's hop back into Xcode, guys, and I'm going to start this off by creating another state property that will be in charge of determining whether or not I show my new view. So I'm going to say at state private var show detail view equals false. And then on my Z stack, we can place a modifier here to actually present something. So we can say like dot sheet is presented and content, select that option and say $ show detail view. And for our content, let's go ahead and delete that really quickly and create our detail view super fast. So let's just go ahead and create a new file here, SwiftUI view. We'll call it detail view. And right now we can just replace this text with like detail view. So if I go back to my content view, let's pass in our detail view from the content there. And now let's just go ahead and create some sort of button that will toggle this property to actually show the sheet or the detail view. So within my VStack here, guys, let's go ahead and just create a button, action and label. The action is going to be show detail view.toggle, and the label can just be some text component that says show detail view. So let's wait for that to load. Okay, so now by clicking this, it will modify show detail view to true. That changes the state of my view, and this .sheet presentation is dependent on that state property. So when this changes to true, it will present this sheet over top of my main view, and it will be the detail view. So I hit that and boom, it presents my new view. So obviously, guys, you could simply just drag that down to dismiss, but let's imagine you wanted it to be like a full screen cover, right? Oops, let's say dot full screen cover. And now if I were to hit this, it will take up the entire screen, and now I have no way of dismissing this. So once again, here's our problem. The thing that's in charge of showing or hiding this view is this show detail view state property that exists in my main view, or my parent view, we can call it, right? So in my detail view, I need a way to modify this property and change it back to false so that I can ultimately hide that view. So when this property changes back to false, it will dismiss the view. When it changes to true, it will show the view. So let's go ahead and just copy and paste this button here, guys. And let's go ahead and put it in our detail view. And let's see. Let's put it in a VStack actually. So we can say VStack, paste that in there. And we need some binding property here now. So we could say binding var show detail view, which is a bool. And this guy will say dismiss. And now we need to pass something into our preview just to make sure that it can still render. So what you guys are going to do is go here, hit fix, and so that it'll create this as an input parameter. And you could just say .constant is false. So you can give bindings constant values, but that's really something you only typically do for your preview just so that it can keep working. So let's go ahead and see what happens now. Let's just wait for our preview to load. Oh, it is not, because we need to now provide this detail view with this property here. So if you guys remember, it has to be linked to a state property, right? So this binding property cannot exist without a state property giving it a value. And that's how it's able to ultimately modify the original state property. You notice here that we are not allowed to give this a value. If I tried to do that, it would throw an error of false. It says cannot assign value of type bool to specified type binding bool. And this is because Swift essentially safeguards against you giving a binding variable a value, and they're saying, hey, this has to come from somewhere else. So back in our content view, you guys will notice that if we fix this error, it's going to say, hey, you need to give me some sort of state property that this is going to bind to. So we can now say $ show detail view. So now these two things are bound together. If we go back to our example, we see here that the state property gives the binding value, and now the binding value can ultimately update the state when it changes. So now they're linked together. So if we go back to Xcode and I resume my preview in my content view, you guys will notice if I hit show detail view and then I hit dismiss, it just dismisses that view right away for me. It's sort of hard to see the animation because it's just a plain white view. So like we could change this back to sheet if we wanted to, and it would make it a little bit more clear. So hit that and you guys can see here that, yeah, I could drag it down, but if I hit dismiss, it will dismiss the view for me. So that's a really good example to show you guys how state and binding properties are linked and how they work together. And we're just going to do one more example to really cement you guys' understanding of how this stuff works. So let's imagine that I want to modify the dark mode appearance in view A, but I want to do it from view B. So let's go ahead and see if we can implement that really quickly before we end this video. So I'm just going to take this toggle code that I have and I'm going to cut it with Command X, and I'm going to place it inside of my view, my detail view. So I can just put that below there. And let's see, I just need to create this as a binding property now, because if you guys remember, we ultimately want to modify the state property that exists in the parent view or the presenting view, but we want to do it from our detail view now. So we're going to create a binding property to do that. Dark mode enabled, which is a bool. So this should make these errors go away, but we need to implement it down in our preview once again, just to keep everything working. You guys can say constant true, constant false, it doesn't matter. You are able to give bindings default values, but by doing this, guys, it means that you can never change the value of the binding, which is kind of stupid, right? But you just have to do that for the preview, essentially. So now we can go back to our content view, and you're going to notice that our detail view is going to ask for another binding property. So we can go here and hit fix, and then we just populate it with our state property up here. Dark mode enabled, sorry. Cool. So now, guys, let's go ahead and see what happens if we show our detail view and pay attention to what's going on in the back there. If I hit that, you guys will notice that it changes it to that dark background, right? And then I can hit dismiss and my view will now have the updated state. If you guys want to make this even a little bit cooler, what you could do is when you go to the detail view, right, you could make it so that the button, by hitting dismiss, modifies the dark mode enabled guy as well. So I could say dark mode enabled.toggle, and this will sort of remove the need to do this from the toggle, but I just want to show you guys how you can modify multiple binding properties from a single action. So you guys will notice if I go back to my content view and I wait for this to load, show detail view, if I hit dismiss, it's going to modify both of those binding properties, right? And it's going to dismiss the view and change the appearance of my app. So one button is modifying these two state properties using the binding properties that exist in the detail view. So that is going to wrap it up for this video, guys. I hope you have a better understanding of how state and binding properties work with SwiftUI now. And I hope you like and subscribe to the channel. I have so much more awesome content on the way, including a Swift algorithm series, more SwiftUI tutorials, and so much more to come. Also, make sure you check out my website at stephancodes.com. The link is in the description, where we have a bunch of pro courses available, premium content, subscription services, all of that good stuff. Check it out at stephancodes.com if you guys want to learn more and take your learning to the next level with me. So thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you in the next video. Peace out.